Hey, it is 12 noon on Wednesday, and that means it is time for another episode of Ask the Instructor. We are here to help you with any real estate questions it is that you have. Like the stream, post your questions in the comments, and we're going to answer them here for you live. Today's episode, we have a really great episode for you today. We're going to be talking about calculating the value of the property. This is a question submitted from Ogla right on our last Facebook stream, so check that one out if you didn't watch last week's show at 12 noon. It's on the Facebook page, it's on YouTube, it's on our Success Center. You can find this all over the place. We're taking over the state of Florida. We're changing the real estate education game. We have a great show for you today, so stay tuned. You're now watching Ask the Instructor.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment. After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career.
Hey, if you like the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Alrighty, and welcome back to Ask the Instructor. I'm John Carissimo, and this show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. If you're thinking about starting or enhancing your career in real estate, give us a call or visit us on the website. Our phone number is 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. You can also see us online at www.tampaschoolofrealestate.com. That's tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Folks, just to give you a little bit of information here, we're the only real estate school that you want to trust with your real estate education experience. There's no other school that does more for their students than what we do. True story, I'm not going to name any names here, but we're actually getting calls from competing real estate schools being like, hey, we don't like what you're doing. They don't like how we're making this better for our students. We're trying to enhance the education experience as much as possible. And you know what? Not everyone can keep up with us. So definitely check it out if you're interested in starting or enhancing your career in real estate. Chances are a lot of you guys tuning in today already are enrolled in one of our courses, and maybe you submitted some questions today. So we got two topics we already got on the key for talking about today. We're going to be talking about calculating value. We're going to get to that one in just a few minutes. But then we're also going to be talking about when a real estate license is required, because this is very important to know. There's a lot of misinformation about it, and I was really taken aback by one of these questions that was kind of submitted in. We had a question that came in from a student named Diana, who was in one of our classes before, and she had been contacted by an investor who's doing some sort of rent-to-own type of agreement, and basically his proposition was, hey, look, you go ahead and meet with these people, and I'll pay you a percentage of the down payment, and I'll pay you a percentage of the lease payment. Well, folks, you know what that's called? If you took the course with us, you'll probably remember what that term is called. It is compensation. Compensation. So compensation, this is the Florida Real Estate Commission's term for any time there's either money or some sort of goods exchanged for a real estate service. Now let's talk about what the real estate services are. Now there's an acronym, and now these acronyms are really great for helping you remember the key information, whether it's on the exam or just really in your normal course of business. If you want to remember, for example, in this case, we're going to be talking about what the services of real estate are. They call these mnemonic devices. An acronym is probably what most people would call them. So it's an acronym that goes by A, bar, sale. So in order to earn compensation based on a transaction, it's going to be for one of these services. So our first one we have here is appraise. So appraising real estate property. Now, the term appraising, that's a very particular term. I like to use the term valuating or estimating value because that's very different than a quote-unquote appraisal. A quote-unquote appraisal, this is typically done by some sort of licensed or state-certified appraiser who has extra qualifications over that of a real estate professional. Now, real estate licensees are allowed to do an appraisal, but only in very limited circumstances. The key time when real estate licensees are only ever allowed to do appraisals is in a non-federally related transaction, which that really doesn't happen too much. It's very rare do we have a real estate transaction that doesn't involve any oversight or involvement from the federal government. So that's very typical that a real estate licensee cannot perform an appraisal. Not to say that they cannot ever, because there are circumstances where they can, but in most cases they cannot. So the short answer really is yes, a real estate licensee can perform an appraisal. That is a real estate service, as long as it's not a federal related transaction. Now, what this often gets confused with are also CMAs and BPOs. Now, CMAs and BPOs, on the other hand, these are what I like to refer to as estimating value. This is not an appraisal. Yes, you're technically figuring out the value for the property, which a lot of people confuse with that term appraisal, but you want to treat that term appraisal and appraising as a completely separate monster, a beast in and of itself, because it's quite different than what you're doing with a CMA or a BPO. The key difference is anytime you're doing an appraisal, you have to follow the USPAP. The USPAP stands for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. And the reason why we have the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, back, I believe it was in the 80s or so, when there was a whole kind of meltdown of the real estate market, maybe 1 fairly similar to what we had not too long ago, maybe not quite as intense depending on where it is in the U.S. that you live, but there was this meltdown, and one of the key things was the banks weren't requiring appraisals to be done. So that's where legislation came down where appraisals were now required for pretty much any type of financing, and that's where the USPAP was created. So this is a set of guidelines that help appraisers come up with the most accurate estimate of value, but it's a lot of rules essentially that you have to follow. You have to use multiple ways to figure out the value to the property, all kinds of extra things you'll have to do. So for the real estate professional, typically it's not worth it to do an appraisal. But now on the other hand, the CMAs and the BPOs, this CMA, this is what you're going to be doing most of the time. The CMA. Now this is good information. I know we're trying to talk about when you need a real estate license here, but the latter part of our show, we're actually going to be talking about estimating the value for the property and figuring out the value, which the CMA is pretty much going to be your go-to. That stands for comparative market analysis. So comparative market analysis. Now with the comparative market analysis, you do not have to follow the USPAP. The only one where the USPAP is required to be followed is for an actual quote-unquote appraisal. So if you're calling a document an appraisal, then it can't be for a federally related transaction. You can't call yourself an appraiser unless you have that designation. So if you went out and got your appraiser license and so on and so forth, now you can maybe call yourself an appraiser. But as a real estate professional, a sales associate, a broker, you're not allowed to call yourself an appraiser. You can do an appraisal as long as it's not federally related and you follow the USPAP. The CMA, on the other hand, that's like the wild, wild west. This is where pretty much anything goes for these type of things. Not really so much anything, because your goal ultimately is still to be accurate in coming up with the value. However it is you're coming up with the value, whatever it is that you're calling it, you really want an accurate opinion on the value. That's great for your sellers. If the sellers ask you, hey, how much is my property worth? I want to sell it. Tell me what it's worth. That's where you want to come up with an accurate value. We're going to talk more about that when we touch into the estimating value for properties, but you could also use these for buyers, because with buyers, they may also want to find out what the true value of a property is. Sure, the sale price might be one thing, but what is the property actually worth? And that's maybe where you'll perform a comparative market analysis. If we look at that C, the comparative, this is when we're looking at comparable properties, that buzzword of comps. Whenever you watch any type of show, Property Brothers, whatever it may be, you're going to hear those terms comps. And comps, I'm sure you've heard of this before because it's very often mentioned. Somebody likes to throw these words around. Hey, comp. What are the comps? People say comps like it's the only word they know. So with the comps, they are very important, and that helps us determine what the value for our property may be. So what we're doing is taking these comparables and basically creating a market analysis based on these comparables. We're going to touch more in how to basically solve that out later, so stay tuned to later in the show. We're going to be covering that in much more detail. Our final one we have to talk about here is the BPO. This stands for broker price opinion. Now the broker price opinion, this is basically looked at as a more in-depth version of the CMA. So the CMA is going to be your bread and butter. That's your go-to. This is the valuation that you use in probably 9 times out of 10. Now when you want a little bit more thorough of a valuation of a property, when you're trying to get a better idea of what the property may be, you maybe have a little bit more of a system coming down with it. That's where we're going to be talking about the BPO. The BPO is the broker price opinion, and this typically, all 3 of these you could charge a fee for, but the broker price opinion, this one you may charge a fee, you may not charge a fee. You're more likely to charge a fee with the BPO than you are with the CMA because the BPO is more thorough. This is typically a standalone product that a broker or sales associate acting on behalf of a broker might sell to particular people. Maybe there's no chance that there's going to be a sale or anything like that with the property, so maybe they just want to make their money off of charging for a valuation. Sure, it's not an appraisal, but it may still be a very accurate valuation of the property. So we're going to be talking about all 3 of those. You could really use these methods we're going to be talking about for understanding the value of the property, regardless of what it is that you're calling it. My recommendation, call it a market analysis or comparative market analysis or a CMA or a valuation. Don't use that term appraisal because that's going to be a lot of red tape that you have to make sure that you're not doing anything wrong with. So that's our first A. And going back to here, when you need a real estate license in order to earn compensation, our next one is to buy. Now, this isn't buying real estate on your behalf. We're going to talk about in a second some of the exemptions from having a real estate license when you actually are not required to have a real estate license. And if this is your own property, if you're looking to buy your own property, the Florida law says you could go out there and you're not required to actually have any realtor or sales associate or broker representing you. So you could actually go into a transaction unrepresented, and that makes sense when you see for sale by owner properties. For sale by owner properties, if it ends up being sold as a for sale by owner, which statistics say most people have very slim chances of being able to sell their property as a for sale by owner, unless maybe they're a realtor before, or they somehow know somebody, or maybe they're just really good at marketing, but chances are, the statistics, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's very low. I think it's less than 1% of homes that were listed as a for sale by owner actually end up selling as a for sale by owner. So it's hard to do, but it's perfectly legal to do it. If you want to sell the property yourself, that's our S that we have down here, to sell. So to buy or to sell on behalf of yourself, that's going to be perfectly legal. But if you're going to be doing that for somebody for compensation, that's our key thing here. If you want to earn money by doing this for somebody, that's where you need a real estate license. And it does need to be an active real estate license. Now, I see there's a bunch of guys joining in on the live feed, so if you guys have any questions on any of this stuff here, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, I've got the feeds up right here, so go ahead and put your questions in the comments. If you're liking what you're watching, go ahead and like it, share it to your friends. I guarantee this information, whether it's somebody who's a seasoned real estate veteran or somebody still trying to pass their real estate exam, could benefit from this information. So we really appreciate the shares. Last week, we had such an amazing turnout of people tuning into this show that we're definitely going to be doing this going forward. Now, people really love the show. I think last week's we have over 1,000 views by now on that. So it's really great. It shows us that people like what we're doing. Like I said, we're trying to change the game in real estate to put education first and put our students first. So let's get back into when compensation is required. So we have another A here. There's actually 3 A's in this acronym. And this acronym is just to help you remember this. So it doesn't really matter what particular order it is that you're putting these in. But this other A that we have down here is auction. So if you want to auction property, if it's your own property, again, you could do that without a real estate license. And remember, any of this stuff, it circumvents it. If you're the owner of a property even, you could say what your property is worth. You can't charge others for figuring out that value, but as the owner, you can say, oh, I say the property is worth this much. Guess what? You just figured out the value for your property. But now if you want to do that on behalf of others and earn compensation for it, that's where you do need to have a real estate license. So auctioning, that's going to be another one where you do need to have a real estate license. So we have a couple of the other ones on here. We have renting and leasing. Now, renting and leasing pretty much mean the same thing. Chances are, if you ever do see the two of them where there is a difference, renting pretty much refers to the tenant side, and leasing more often refers to the landlord side of things. But overall, it's basically the same overall topic here. We also have exchange down here at the bottom. And our very last real estate service is to advertise. So we have appraising, buying, auctioning, renting, selling, advertising, leasing, and exchanging. Anytime you're doing any of these real estate services, you need to have a real estate license if you're doing this on behalf of others for compensation. Believe me, it's illegal. There's a couple exceptions we're going to talk about, but it's illegal, and it's not like, hey, there's a little slap on the wrist. This could actually get you up to 5 years in jail. That's serious when we think about this. This is a third-degree felony, up to 5 years in jail for doing these services for others for compensation. So if you do that, get your real estate license. Florida is one of the easiest states to get your real estate license in. If you have friends and family, or maybe you yourself have taken the real estate exam, yes, it is a tough exam, but not if you know the material. That's why we're doing these Ask the Instructor shows, to really help you guys understand the real estate market, the real estate industry, because if you know the material, it's very easy to pass the state exam and your class exam and to really master this game. But the knowledge is really the foundation of all this. So again, that's why we do this show here. Now, going back to the particular question we got in, it was and this is really good. I really like this question. I don't know if this was something that actually happened, or it's a hypothetical that she came up with, or maybe it was something she saw on an exam. But basically, the scenario goes that the owner of a property offered to pay a percentage of a down payment and a percentage of monthly payments, as they didn't use the term compensation. They just said, I'm going to pay you X percent of the down payment and X percent of the monthly payments. Well, guess what? That is compensation. So compensation based on a real estate service. So anytime you're doing these real estate services, you need to have a valid real estate license if you do want to earn compensation. And this does also have to be an active license. So you're going to be required to register your license with a broker. You can also register your license with an owner developer, but now when you're doing this with an owner developer, you're tied to just that owner developer's properties. If you register your license with a broker, you're actually free to sell any sort of property in Florida, even businesses. Your real estate license will not only just work for residential property, it'll work for commercial property, it'll work for doing property management services. The real estate license is a very universal license. I don't want to say universal because it doesn't cover completely everything, but it is such a wide sweeping license that allows you to get into so many different aspects of the real estate industry with that same sales associate license. So these are all of the services that you do need to have a real estate license for. If you do plan on doing any of these for compensation for others, then you do need to have a real estate license. Now let's talk about some of the exceptions to this rule, because there are some exceptions. And there's basically two main categories really when it comes down to it, if we're really summing this up in a very succinct type of manner. So our two categories that we typically break down to is our for sale by owner. FSBO is what you'll hear. You get a real estate license, and that's another word people like to use as a buzzword, probably even more so than comp, is FSBO. That stands for sale by owner, in case you've ever heard that. Now you know exactly what that means. So our for sale by owner type of concept, this applies in a lot of cases. We're going to talk about some particular scenarios, but the other scenario is a salary. So if you're just paid a salary, we'll talk about these ones first, then we'll get into the for sale by owner side of things. If you're just paid a salary, you do not need to have a real estate license. So no real estate license is required if you're only paid a salary, but that means no compensation based on sales. So that's no commission. You can't earn commission based on sales or based on any of those real estate services. It has to be a flat rate salary, no commission, no bonuses, no anything to be considered compensation. They can't even take you out to dinner because you sold so many houses for this particular owner or whatever it may be. If you could only be paid a flat rate salary, and if there's any way they could track compensation back down to your particular arrangement that was based on sales, that's where you could be hit. Both you and the other party working in this matter, both of you would be legally tied to this. It's a third-degree felony. That's up to 5 years in jail again and up to a $5,000 penalty. So again, it's fairly easy to get your real estate license in Florida. Give us a call if you're at all interested in doing that. Phone number is 813-928-0106. When we come back from this commercial break, we're going to talk more about the particular exemptions. My name is John Chrismo, and you're watching Ask the Instructor.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment.
If you know if someone wants to start or enhance their career in real estate, we have a gift they're sure to love. You can now purchase gift certificates for any of our courses or study materials. These can be used for our classroom courses throughout the Tampa Bay area or our online courses available from anywhere in the world. We can even set these up for our exam prep tools or our bookstore. Our advisors are standing by to help you choose the perfect gift for your loved ones this holiday season. These gift certificates never expired and can be used anytime. So give us a call today at 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. And from our family to yours, happy holidays from the Tampa School of Real Estate.
After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to Ask the Instructor. I'm John Chrisman. This show is brought to you by Tampa School of Real Estate. Check us out online at tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com if you're at all interested in starting or enhancing your career in real estate. Now, while we're on the break here, I went ahead and checked into our chat line. Again, we have our live chat going on both Facebook and YouTube, so if you do have questions, if there's something you don't quite get, put it in here because I'm checking in on this stuff. You could actually interact with us live here on the show. We actually had a question come in from Mito Rosales. Thank you so much for sending in your question. It looks like you're asking a question about concurrent types of ownership. We'll get into that one after we finish up on these for sale by owners and salaries. But if you guys have any questions on any of this material, go ahead and put it in the comments, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. I've got them both loaded up right now, and I'll try to get those questions answered for you. So now going back to our exemptions, these are when you don't need a real estate license. Again, if this is a for sale by owner type of property, or a salaried type of arrangement, you do not need to have a license. So before we went on break, we were talking about the salaried types of positions, and this could be when you're working with an owner-developer. Now, the key thing with both of these is no compensation, based on sales at least, or leases. So whether it's sales or leases, and you can see this with an owner-developer. It could be for an apartment complex. You could also see that where we have some sort of salaried individual. Again, can't be any sort of compensation based on sales, so that's kind of our key underlying factor. We cannot have any sort of compensation based on sales. So apartment complex is one of them. Another one that comes up quite a bit as well is a business. People who work at some sort of business. So let's say you're working on selling as part of the business as an employee of the business. As long as, again, you don't get any compensation based on the sale or the lease of that asset of the business, whether it's a piece of property or a piece of the business itself, then you can actually do that without having a real estate license. So pretty much anytime it's salaried individuals, then you are not required to have a real estate license. Now, on the for sale by owner side of things, we have the buying aspect. You could sell a for sale by owner. We could not be talking about just real estate. We could be talking about businesses. Because businesses in not only the state of Florida, but in the entire United States, they're looked at as their own separate entity, almost as if it's a fictitious person. So this business is allowed to sell on behalf of itself without needing to have any sort of real estate license, meaning the director or an employee or somebody who works within that entity can actually sell this business, again, as long as they're just paid a salary, or if they're an owner of a business. Let's say that we're going to draw out a little circle here. So this is our business, and we have two owners that own it 50-50. So if these two owners were to sell this business, each would only be entitled to 50% of whatever it is that they own. So if this business is entailed of, it comes out to be $100,000, they would each be entitled. So with each one of these at 50%, that means that if, let's say, owner A, we'll give these some names, we'll say owner A and owner B. Let's say that owner A says, I'm going to be in charge of selling the property. I've watched some videos online. I know what I'm talking about. I've watched a couple episodes of Ask the Instructor. Never went through to actually get my license, but I saw what they were talking about on there, so I know how to do this stuff. Probably missed this episode where it explains where you can't do this. But let's say if they want to charge 55%. So if they want to get 55% and leave the other owner with 45%, that is not possible. That extra 5% that we're dealing with here, that extra 5% that this person's effectively taking from owner B, that's going to be compensation based on the sale. So anytime you're selling a business, if you are multiple people own it, and this could be the same thing for a property. If this is a property we're talking about with two owners of a property, whether it's just a single family home, whether it could be some sort of timeshare or anything like that, that's going to be where you can't break up any more than what you just own. So if you own 50%, you're only entitled to 50% of the net proceeds from the sale. You can't take a penny more because that extra penny, that's compensation. So that's pretty much when you're required to get a real estate license. If you're worried about whether or not you need to have a real estate license, there are a few other exemptions that are a little bit more particular that don't really come up too often unless you're maybe some sort of special niche type of profession or something like that. Attorneys have some exemptions and whatnot. If you're interested to learn more about these, take our pre-licensing course. You'll learn about every single exemption that's out there, as well as a lot more details about when it's required to get your real estate license. If you've been thinking about it, give us a call. The phone number is 813-928-0106. We'd love to help you out. And again, if you guys are watching in here and you have some questions on this material, go ahead and post your comments. If there's a question that you have that's even unrelated to this, we could try to get to this show. And if we don't get to it to this show, next week at Wednesday, we do the show every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. So that hopefully that answers, Diana, I hope you were watching and you saw this. I hope it answered your question about when you need to have a real estate license. The simple answer is most of the time. Most of the time you will need to have a real estate license, especially if you're going to want to earn any sort of compensation based on sales. So our next topic we're going to be talking about is coming up with a value for a property. And this is a hot topic. This is actually one of my favorite chapters to teach in our pre-licensing classes because I just love this so much, coming up with the value. It's fun. I think it's fun. Yeah, we're involved with some numbers here. We're working with some math, but it's some fun stuff because you can actually see what this property is worth and when you can see how basically this sausage is made. Now, let me give a little preface with this stuff here. There's these automated valuation methods or automated valuation models that you see all over the place. You can go on Zillow. That's the best example of where most people know about these AVMs, these automated valuation models. And on Zillow, you've probably heard of the Zestimate before. So the Zestimate is an example of one of these automated valuation models. And if you ever want to have a way to look like you don't know what you're doing as a real estate professional, show up on some sort of appointment with a Zestimate and say, hey, look, this is what Zillow says it's worth. It must be true because you know it's Zillow and they're the #1 result on Google. If Zillow can solve their problems, what do they need you for? You have to be able to solve their problem in a way that they can't solve by themselves. That's how you create value, and that's how you're able to charge higher commission rates, is when you charge higher values. If you look at the realtors that are out there that charge these crazy high commission rates, those are going to be people that solve a problem at a much greater level, or they have a much more elegant solution to a problem, or they make somebody's life easier. The whole open market economy that we live in here, the more you could solve somebody's problem, the more value that you're worth. So that's just something really big to take away there. We're going to be talking a lot about value here and understanding solving this problem, and that creates value. That's a big thing that you want to wrap your mind around, not only for just figuring out the value of a property, but also for figuring out a value for yourself and how much money it is that you're worth to a particular buyer or seller. So let's talk about how this system works with these automated valuation methods. So if you've ever taken any sort of statistic classes or anything like that, and if not, don't worry, this isn't too complex. Statistics is like the easiest math that's out there. It's more language than it is math because usually your calculator does all the stuff for you with this. But it's really good to get an understanding of how these numbers work. And there's a concept called a bell curve. You've probably seen one of these before. So this is what's called a bell curve. And now with these bell curves, you'll notice that we have it's low on both of these sides and high right here in the middle. And there's going to be varying slopes and degrees of these bell curves. They don't always look perfect like this one here, and even this one's a little lopsided because I'm not that good of a drawer. But this middle part right here, this is most likely to be what our value of the property would actually be. So if we look at this here, let's say that this property is most likely, for whatever reason, we have something telling us that $250,000 is our property value. And that could be what's coming up with these automated valuation methods. Now, like I said, there's the Zillow Zestimate that's out there, which, I mean, it's a great tool because it's available for anyone to get an idea at least of where the property value may actually be. But with these automated valuation methods, there's a lot of flaws, especially when it pinpoints a number exactly like that, saying $250,000 is our number. If we look at this here, you can see pretty close in this range here where we're still almost on that same level. We have a pretty different degree where this could fall. And just to give you some context here, this would be basically where we have $0, and this would be, let's say, in this case, $300,000. So we have 0 over here, 300,000 here, and now you can kind of see where this is outlaying us. Most likely, and this is our percentage chance here, most likely our property is worth $250,000. But we have already a pretty big range where maybe it is $225,000. Or maybe it's on the higher end of this at $275,000. And this is where the skills of a highly trained real estate professional or an appraiser or anybody could come in and try to make a little bit more sense out of these numbers. So understanding how it is they come up with these values, you could kind of explain where there's some sort of degree of error. Yes, that price could be higher than what this estimate's coming up with, or maybe it could actually be lower. Chances are they like to overshoot on the values, because if somebody goes on a website and says their house is only worth $225,000 when they think it's maybe $250,000 or $275,000, they're not going to be happy with that website, and maybe they won't come back to it. So for that reason, I think maybe a lot of these methods kind of overshoot for a little bit, but who knows? That's just my theory in all of this. So we have our range here. And there's a system in the MLS system called Realist. It's part of the tools that you get when you join the Association of Realtors. If you're starting in real estate, highly recommend joining the Association of Realtors because you get access to a lot of tools that help you out with this type of thing, especially understanding this. This will kind of help you guide through coming up with values for a property without having to do all the number crunching yourself and all of this. So we have this range of values here, and that's what I really like about this Realist system, is that they actually give you a range of values. Yes, they'll say maybe where they think the value is, but then they also show you this range of where the property value may actually lie. So we have this whole range of it here, and then all the way down here on this end we have the 0, and over here we have 300,000. So ultimately, this represents our range of what the property might actually be worth. Yes, it could actually be worth nothing. Who knows? Maybe there's some sort of sinkhole under it, and it basically has some marginal type of value. Very low chance that that's going to happen. That's why this falls way down here on our bell curve. But on the reverse end of the spectrum, maybe by some rare opportunity, just maybe as likely as there being a sinkhole, it's actually worth this higher amount of money as opposed to the lower amount of money that we're talking about here. So that's the way this bell curve works. The higher we get on this curve, the higher the percent likelihood that we're actually going to be in that value. And really, anywhere that we come in here, we're probably pretty close. But now $225,000 to $275,000, that's a $50,000 gap there. That's a lot of money, not just for your seller, but also for you in commission money. Now, a lot of people may say, well, let's just take the high number. Let's start out with a listing price of $275,000, and then we'll go ahead and just work our way down in price reductions and negotiations and things like that. But let's get it out there for $275,000, and if we get it out there for $275,000, then we'll go ahead and worry about bringing the price down later. Let me explain to you why you do not want to do that. Why you want to price the property right to begin with. It's very important. And now this is where the understanding of how to come up with an accurate value on a property is really going to help you out, because if you could come up with an accurate value for a property, you're not going to be subject to this problem we're about to talk about here. And this is something that you need to be able to explain to sellers, because sellers have that mindset typically where they want to try to push the property value higher, and ultimately that might end up hurting them more than it's going to help them. It's not as simple as if we listed higher, then we could worry about negotiating and doing price reductions later. The way that this works, and I'm going to draw you guys another graph here. Now this one's going to look slightly different. But now with this graph, this is basically what we're looking at. And this is our eyeballs on the property. So this is how many eyeballs we have on the property. This is a lot. This is, let's say, 1,000 eyeballs on the property, maybe even more than that. And down here is 0 eyeballs on the property. And now as we go here, this is our length of time. Let's say this goes out to 30 days. Now, why are we getting so many eyeballs on our property right away on day 0 when the property is first listed? Well, let's say, again, we'll use that concept of Zillow. If you subscribe to Zillow, or maybe you work with a realtor, or maybe you have access to the MLS system yourself, but you get notifications from properties as soon as they're listed. And guess what? You're not the only person getting the notifications for these. What's another great thing about this MLS system is it syndicates out your property just by putting your property into the MLS, putting your description, putting your pictures and all this information in there. It takes that information, not only puts it on the MLS as a new listing, and that means that every realtor that uses the MLS system that has a client that's subscribed to some automatic updates for properties that match the criteria. So if your property matches someone's criteria, they automatically get an email for that. But not just on the realtor side of things with MLS, with Zillow, with Trulia, with Realtor.com, with Homes.com, all these websites that are designed to get people to go on them to look at properties, this is going to be where they're like, hey, look at this new listing. This is a great property you should check out. Look at this. This matches your criteria. And people open their emails, they go click on this, they look at this, and then like, hey, let's go see the property. But this doesn't necessarily translate exactly in. These eyeballs that we're getting on the property doesn't necessarily translate to showings. It doesn't translate to offers either. Sometimes that may be, but the key thing is that you price it right. So let's say, going back to our last example, that we decided we had that range of 225 to 275 with our best guess at $250,000. So $250,000 is where we think it is, but we're going to use the theory now that if we list it higher, we'll negotiate down to that $250,000 price, which that theory does have some weight to it. Yes, you normally never sell the property for its listed price unless maybe it's listed for too low, or maybe you got it right on the money right off the bat. That's what we're going to be aiming for here. The more you understand this, hopefully the more you're going to hit this right on the bat like that there. So we think it's at $250,000, but for whatever reason, we're listing it for $275,000. Maybe the seller says, hey, you know what, I want to list it higher for whatever reason, that they just think they're going to negotiate it lower, or maybe you didn't do as good of a job of explaining this. Whatever the reason may be, there's a bunch of different ones, and it's not necessarily your fault with this here. So let's say we listed at $275,000. So here we have the price. It goes out in all of our emails at $275,000. So this goes out to not only our clients that are maybe interested in this type of criteria of a property, but every other realtor that's out there, everyone subscribed on Zillow and Trulia and all these other websites where this matches their search criteria. But let's say they open up this email, and now there's a lot of different reasons why you might not end up getting listing appointments. Because if we think tracing back through the steps in our sale of closing a property, to get to the closing, before we can have a closing, we have to have a contract. Before we have a contract, we have to have an appointment, and maybe several appointments to get this contract. And before we have an appointment, that's where we got to have eyeballs on the property. So we got to have eyes on the property to get an appointment, to get a contract, get the property to close. So that's our whole process. And now this seems really simple, but it's crucial to understand how it is that we're going through this. And really the arrow should be pointing this way. This is the direction that we're moving. We're going from eyeballs to an appointment to a contract to a closing. And in order to get to that closing where we ultimately want to be, where the property does sell, we first have to have a contract, and before that we have to have an appointment, and before that we get the eyeballs. So we got our problem with the eyeballs solved here. And this is great for your listing presentations. Whenever you're talking to your clients, you tell them that, hey, look, I'm going to put this in the MLS system, and we're going to get massive exposure on this property. Anybody that's even remotely interested in this property, and they've expressed that online in one of these sites, that you go out to all these different websites, all the different broker websites that are out there that allows people to go on and subscribe to different property updates and things like that. This all makes it completely possible to get the eyeballs on your property. So our technology really solves this first problem. Back before we had the technology, yes, the MLS was still great, but it used to be where you had a big MLS book, and this only went out to realtors, and people weren't able to just go online and find this information as easily. So it makes the listing agent's job a lot easier, because this first step of getting the eyeballs on the property completely solved. So we've got that checked off. We've got our eyeballs on the property. Now our next thing that we need to accomplish is getting our appointments. So in order to go from eyeballs, people seeing the property, to get to an appointment, this is where the pricing comes into play. But it's not just the pricing. Because I'm a big proponent that the value could be worth more if you show the value is worth more. So you definitely want to do a great job in taking pictures. Maybe spend some extra money. If you're not very good at taking pictures yourself, I can't tell you how many pictures I've seen of listings before where there's an agent covering up the lens on a camera, or all kinds of crazy stuff like that, where the image is blurry or it's too dark. No one wants to go see that property. It looks dark in the pictures, and people are like, oh, well, this doesn't look too exciting. But then when you see a professionally photographed property, or maybe you're a hobby photographer yourself, and maybe you could do that yourself, which is great, especially when you know how to fish now, and you can do this yourself. You don't have to rely on some professional photographer. But especially as you get more and more listings, you'll probably want that professional photographer to go in there, get the job done, and get out very quickly, very fast, very professionally, and get you the high-resolution photos you need to maybe command this $275,000 price point. But now let's say that because ultimately in order to get appointments, your price has to equal the value, or at least be close to the value. If your asking price for the property is nowhere near your value, that's where you will not get appointments. if you have a price that's way higher than what the value, or at least the perceived value, because I've seen it at the other end of the spectrum too. I talk about all these people that done a lousy job marketing a property and putting lousy pictures and all these things like that. At the same time, there's agents that have taken these dumps, for lack of a better term, and actually made them look very presentable, where actually maybe the price is actually above the value of the property. So you could really land on either end of this. The more you understand coming up with an accurate value, the more this will help you out. But if this price isn't even close to your value, this is not going to translate. The eyeballs are not going to translate into appointments. So let's say we'll do this here in red. So let's say that our price does not equal value. If our price does not equal value, we're going to draw the second line here for appointments, and it's maybe going to look something like this. So we had all these eyeballs on the property, but yeah, maybe we'll get a couple appointments. It really depends on how far off it is from your price and value differential. If your price is very close to the value, this line is going to be a lot higher. So let's say our price is equal to our value. Let's say the price is equal to the value. Now maybe your appointments are going to look something like this. Notice you'll have a lot higher appointments now because the price is closer to the value. The closer you get your price to the value, or at least the perceived value, hey, maybe if your seller wants to use the strategy of pricing it up higher, then you really got to be on your game for marketing the property to the best of your abilities. You really have to do everything it is that you can to make that property look like it's $275,000. And then maybe when they get there, you can maybe get into some negotiations and things like that. Ultimately, it's harder the more that you outprice the value of the property. The higher your price goes in relation to the value of the property, the less likely you're going to get appointments, and the less likely those appointments are actually going to equate into any sort of contracts. Because maybe you do a great job marketing the property and you get a bunch of appointments, but people see that the property isn't really what it looked like online, so they go check it out in person and be like, oh yeah, it looked a lot nicer online, which great job to the listing agent. That's your job, is to make it as great as possible looking online and give the greatest description of it and so on and so forth, and give the full details and make people want to see the property. But now maybe when they get there, if the price was equal to the value, that's where you'll maybe end up getting into these contracts. So you'll go from your appointments now into your contracts. But in order to go from the appointment now into a contract, this is where this gets looked at now, maybe more so with a magnifying glass. And then going from the contract to the closing, instead of going at this with a magnifying glass, we're looking at this now with a microscope. And typically, especially if it's a financed property, you have to bring in some sort of licensed or certified appraiser. This is usually required by the bank to go through and look at the property. So that's basically our evolution of the value. But the key thing is, if you price it right to begin with, that's where you're most likely to get your appointment. So especially if the seller wants to sell the property quickly, they're not going to be accomplishing that by overpricing their property. Yes, you may eventually get from that $275,000 price down to the $250,000 price, but it may take some time actually getting to that. So that's our concept of the value of the property and kind of how to understand that. When we come back after this commercial break, we're actually going to go through some strategies now to actually take comparable properties in the neighborhood and use that to come up with the value for the property. Again, if you have questions on any of this material, put it in the comments. We've got the comments loaded up right on here so I could see that stuff live. You guys are watching this live. This is not any sort of pre-recording or anything. There's only a couple second delay from the words coming out of my mouth to it going through the speakers on your phone or computer. So if you have questions about any of these concepts, or if this is making sense to you, let me know so we could go ahead and keep doing these episodes. And of course, don't forget to like and share this. Again, I'm John Carissimo, and you're watching Ask the Instructor. Stay tuned for more of this after the break.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment.
If you know if someone wants to start or enhance their career in real estate, we have a gift they're sure to love. You can now purchase gift certificates for any of our courses or study materials. These can be used for our classroom courses throughout the Tampa Bay area or our online courses available from anywhere in the world. We can even set these up for our exam prep tools or our bookstore. Our advisors are standing by to help you choose the perfect gift for your loved ones this holiday season. These gift certificates never expired and can be used anytime. So give us a call today at 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. And from our family to yours, happy holidays from the Tampa School of Real Estate.
After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to Ask the Instructor. My name is John Carissimo, and this show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. We're doing this show to help out not only our students enrolled in our classroom and online courses, but everyone in the state of Florida, because there's so much misinformation in there about the real estate industry, about these concepts that we talk about here. So we're here to solve that problem. Today's episode, we've been talking a lot about value of a property and figuring out the value before the break. And if you guys are missing any of this stuff, this recording is going to be available for you, because I know a lot of our students aren't available to watch this exactly at noon on every Wednesday. So if you're one of those students, if you can't watch this on noon on Wednesday, check back in, because the recording is going to be available shortly after the show, where you could pause, rewind. I know this gets a little fast moving sometime, especially if you're new to this material, but go ahead and subscribe to this and you'll automatically get the recording as soon as this is available. So going back to this whole value concept here, before the break we were talking about making sure you price your property right, because initially when you list the property, that's where you're getting the most eyeballs on your property. This is where you get the most people seeing your property, and as time goes on, this is going to be where you don't get as many people seeing this. Yes, there'll be a little bit of a spike maybe when you have a price reduction, but what does that say to you? Think of yourself now as a buyer and you see a property that has a price reduction listed. Yeah, it's a great way to get more eyeballs, to maybe add in a little peak here where we have a price reduction, to see something like that where we increase the number of eyeballs on our property. But chances are they're going to see that. Again, think of this as a buyer. They see a price reduction. Oh, well, what's wrong with this property? Why is it so overpriced? And that's where maybe this negotiation gets a little bit more difficult of coming to the accurate valuation for the property. So let's go ahead and talk now about how to understand what these numbers may be. I know I was talking about these automated valuation models, but now personally, I do like them. I'm a fan of really anything technologically. And this isn't even new, I don't even want to call it new, but anything where technology can help you do your job, it's great. But these automated valuation models, at least for me, I just look at this as a reference point maybe. Somewhere like, okay, the computer says it's worth this, let's see what it really is worth. Let's see if the computer got it right. Because the computer, it seems like it's somehow magically coming up with a value for the property. It's magically saying the property is worth $250,000, which that might be spot on. They might have got it right, because it does work in some instances where they hit the money right on the head, but chances are there's going to be some wiggle room that we have in there. So the more that you understand this method of coming up with property values, maybe you tweak that automated valuation a little bit, or maybe you want to go old school and just do this completely from scratch. And if you are taking your exam, you do have to do some of these, they're called adjustments that we're going to be talking about here in just a second on property values for figuring out an accurate value. So we're going to use another little chart. And in my classes, whether it's the pre-licensing, the exam review, whatever it may be, this is the same way I describe this. I know my students love it. Hopefully you guys watching here, maybe this is a refresher, maybe you're in one of my classes, but I'm sure that you're going to love this, because this is a tried and true method for figuring out what type of adjustment that you're going to make. So again, we're going to use another number line here. So we have another number line, and with this one now we have high value here. So lots of dollar signs, and down here we have low value. So the reason why I draw this out, now this particular line down here doesn't really necessarily matter quite as much. It's really just this one side that we're dealing with here. So we have our high dollar value and our low dollar value. So you can see how this is laid out here. Now, we know that the property, so let's give a scenario to make this a little bit more real world of when we actually may see something like this. The reason why we're thinking of this now is maybe we're in a seller's property. There's a couple different scenarios, but let's say we're in a seller's property or somebody that's thinking about selling their property. They called you up and they're like, hey, John, I'm thinking about selling my property. I heard you're the best in the industry. I've seen your stuff on YouTube or whatever it may be, and I want you to sell my house. So I'm like, great, I'll go ahead and set it up to come talk about your house, look at your house. We're like, oh, well, before we sign anything, I want you to figure out the value for my property. I have no idea what the value for my property is, or maybe chances are in this day and age, they do have an idea of their property. They're like, I looked online and it says my property is worth $250,000. Typically, they think their property is worth more than that, which the more you understand this, the more you could better explain how this value kind of changes and whatnot. But ultimately, you're going to have that question. It could be for a seller where the seller's saying, hey, what is my property worth? Or maybe you're now working with a buyer and you're showing a property and the buyer says, well, that sale price seems kind of high. What do you think the value is? And that's where you have to be able to kind of understand at the very least and speak to these numbers. Because if you just print out some sort of sheet, oh, computer says it's worth this, and you're like, well, what does that mean? And you're like, well, it means the computer says it's this value. They're going to look at you like you don't know what you're doing, like you're not a professional. And guess what? If you don't act like a professional, they're not going to want to use you. The buyers will go and move to another agent. There's not a whole lot of loyalty unless you have some special agreements signed. But if you're talking about signing agreements, that's where you have to demonstrate your professionalism to clients. So at the very least, you might have to just understand this at a higher level to be able to speak to this. But you might want to actually do some valuations like this, because it does, the more you perform these valuations, the better understanding it is that you get about how these are calculated. So let's say the house that we're looking at, we're in the scenario here with the seller. And the seller's house, we know it's not the most expensive house in the neighborhood, but we also know it's not the cheapest house in the neighborhood. It falls maybe somewhere right in the middle here. So we know it's not the most expensive, we know it's not the cheapest, we just know our property is somewhere in the middle, but we don't know where it is exactly. We don't know whether it's closer. Let's say the most expensive house in the neighborhood is, we'll say $400,000. That's our highest point. And then our lowest point, let's say it's $200,000. And just a little full disclosure with this example, this is an oversimplification, but this is what you need to understand the concept of what we're going to be doing here in just a second. So we have a property, it's in a neighborhood in a range of $400,000 down to $200,000. High values and low values. And you could use this anytime you're looking at any sort of properties. You look at the properties that are around it, and that'll help give you an indication. So we already know that our range is $200,000 to $400,000. Going back to our little bell curve it was that we've had, we have our $200,000 on this side and we have our $400,000 on that side, because that's probably we're going to actually end up landing with all this here. But that's a really big range. And if you tell your seller, hey, you know what, based on my expert opinion, the property is valued between $200,000 and $400,000, what do you think? They're going to look at you maybe with a blank face. Maybe they'll say, well, what is the value? That's probably going to be what they're asking. But that's not very reassuring. $200,000 to $400,000, that's a huge range. You're like, oh, so you looked at what the lowest price property is and the highest price property. Great. Thanks for wasting my time today. There's the door. And they're going to maybe call up a true professional that understands how to come up with a better value of property. So starting out with the range, that's really where we want to start. Because we know we probably aren't going to be able to sell our property for more than $400,000. And that's more that you have to worry about rather than the low end. Unless you're dealing with the cheapest, ugliest, nastiest property in the neighborhood, that's really the only time you're going to be looking at the very bottom of the barrel right here. But this is where you're usually going to be looking at, is this highest value, because the seller might want to say, well, I have the nicest house in the neighborhood, so I want to put mine over this certain price here. And that's where you have to identify what the differences are between these comparable properties. So when we're using this sales comparison approach, this is what this is called here, the sales comparison approach. Looking at the sales comparison approach, what you do take other properties that are for sale in the neighborhood, whether it be $400,000 or $200,000, you take these other sales. So let's say one property sold for $400,000. So we have a property sale for $400,000. And we also have a property sale in the same neighborhood for $200,000. And we've pretty much already established that. That's how we figured out this range. The $200,000 price point and the $400,000 price point. So we know we're somewhere kind of in the middle of these numbers. And now you can see the way I drew this out here. I've almost put our property here in the middle. And now let's talk about, we're going to identify only one difference. In the real world, you're going to have much more than just one difference, and you're going to do one of these adjustments is what we're going to be talking about here for each attribute that's different on the property. So let's say that this is a 4-bedroom property. And let's say that this is a 2-bedroom property. And let's say that our subject property, that's what this is called, our subject. It's very important to understand these terms, especially if you're taking the exam. This is our subject property, this is our comp, and this is also a comp. You'll probably see comparable rather than comp, but same thing, just a shortened term. So we have our 2-bedroom and our 4-bedroom, and our one here in the middle, the one we're trying to figure out the value for, is 3 bedrooms. Now, this being an oversimplified type of an example, hopefully you're able to kind of catch on and say, okay, if a 2-bedroom is $200,000, a 4-bedroom is $400,000, what is our 3-bedroom property worth in this same neighborhood? So looking at that information, you're probably automatically thinking right off the bat, well, this is probably $300,000. $300,000 is going to be my guess on this property because it's somewhere kind of in the middle of these two properties. And if you're thinking $300,000, you're getting the basics and the fundamentals of this adjustment. That's why I like to draw this out in this way, because this helps kind of show and illustrate what we're doing. The reason why you're thinking that this property is worth $300,000 for a 3-bedroom is because maybe you're thinking, oh, it's about $100,000 worth of value for a bedroom. Exactly. But now what are we doing? And this is going to help you out for the more complex scenarios where you're making adjustments, because it's not always as easy as the property value is worth $100,000 per bedroom. It's really never that easy, but this is the fundamental. This is going to be the same adjustments that we're going to be doing based on whatever is different about the property. So what we're doing with this property down here, since it's only 2 bedrooms and our subject property is 3 bedrooms, we'll have to add the value of 1 bedroom. So we're adding 1 bedroom worth of value. 1 bedroom worth of value is $100,000. Or at least that's what we figured. And in the real world, when you see this type of stuff, this is where you have to use your expert judgment on how much extra value a bedroom, or how much extra value a pool, or how much extra value an extra bathroom, or an extra garage, or hardwood floors, or a new roof, or all these different things that make properties unique in their own special way. These are going to be the things that either raise our value or decrease our value. So in this case here, if we're just looking at the bedroom, that bedroom, based on our expert opinion and our analysis of the neighborhood, we figured a bedroom to be worth about $100,000. So if we're adding the value of that bedroom, we're adding $100,000. This is called an adjusted sales price. We went from $200,000, which was our actual sales price. We added $100,000 as an adjustment. This is called an adjustment. And we ended up with a $300,000 adjusted value. So effectively, what we're saying when we're adding this $100,000 in value to get to a $300,000 adjusted value, we're saying if this property that's sold for $200,000, if it were in fact a 3-bedroom, like the property we're trying to figure out the value for, if it were 3 bedrooms, it would be worth an extra $100,000 in value. So we're adding that $100,000 in value due to that extra bedroom. There's also an acronym that goes along with this here that'll help you remember this, and it's CIA. Like the Central Intelligence Agency. So CIA, and that stands for, not Central Intelligence Agency in this case, that's just, again, another mnemonic device, another acronym to help you remember this. Comparable, inferior, add. So if our comparable is inferior, being, yes it is, it's inferior, our subject has 3 bedrooms, our comparable has 2 bedrooms, so our comparable is inferior, we have to add value. We're trying to get everything on the same level playing field. This is our equal level playing field here, what we're trying to get all of our property values to. We're trying to escalate everything to that level playing field. So now you can kind of see, or at least start to think of what we're going to have to do to this 4-bedroom property that's over here. This is a superior property. This property is better. It's got an extra bedroom. We have 4 bedrooms here, and our subject property only has 3 bedrooms. So now we ask the question, what would this property sell for if it was 3 bedrooms? Well, if we're using that number of our bedrooms being worth $100,000, in this case now we're going to subtract $100,000. So we're taking our value of the bedroom, which we determined to be $100,000, and we're subtracting that value, again, to get to our adjusted sale price of $300,000. So we're adding $100,000 here, we're subtracting $100,000 here, and effectively what we're doing is we're leveling the playing field. We're bringing the inferior property up, we're bringing the better property down. And now this one has an acronym to go with it as well, which is CBS, comparable, better, subtract. So our comparable is better, so we're going to subtract property value. So those two acronyms alone can really help you remember what we're doing here, CBS or CIA. So you can really remember the acronyms, comparable, inferior, add, comparable, better, subtract. Or you can remember the concept, and this is the way I like to do it because you really will never be wrong in this one. We'll talk about how these acronyms, you have to have some strings attached to them to make sure they're accurate. But ultimately what you're trying to do is get everything on a level playing field. You're trying to bring up our inferior properties and bring down our comparable, our better properties, and that's going to give us our level playing field. This is going to say if our properties were just like our subject. This is our star of the show. The subject property is the star of what we're trying to figure out the value for. Everything that we're looking at is going to be compared to the subject property. That's why we call these comparables. We're comparing this property value to our subject property. We're comparing this property value to our subject property. And what we have to do to make it truly comparable is bring up the value here and bring down the value here. So those are the adjustments essentially that we have to make in all this here, bringing up the property value here, bringing down the property value there. Whether it's, you think of this with the drawing, which I really like this drawing because it really helps you visualize this, or if we're thinking about this now with these acronyms, CBS and CIA. So that is how you make adjustments. And now based on these adjustments that we came up with here, and it won't always be a perfect scenario like this where it exactly equals out. Again, this is an oversimplification to help you understand these concepts, because if you understand this, we're going to do next a little bit more complex problem where we're adding and subtracting some different attributes other than just the bedrooms. So what we have here, the $300,000, that's our adjusted sales price, our adjusted value of these properties. And based on these $300,000, that says our subject property is probably worth $300,000. And so you could go to your seller confidently, whether it's you're explaining how this is came up with, because this is the same thing that the automated valuation models are using to figure out the value of the property, but they're based on public record information. Public record information is pretty much limited to just bedrooms and bathrooms, whether or not the property has a pool, regardless of how extravagant of a pool it may be. It doesn't take into account the layout of the property, that it being appeasing paint colors that buyers typically like, and things like that. These are all things where you actually get into the property as a real estate professional. You could typically come up with a much more accurate valuation rather than just what you could find online that's a quick and easy fix to coming up with the property value. And at the very least, even if you are using one of these, at least you could explain how this value is came up with, because if the seller thinks their property is worth $400,000, if they say, well, you know, the property that was 4 bedrooms sold for $400,000, and you know, my property only has 3 bedrooms, but it's still a really nice property. It's just as nice as them, so I want to sell mine for $375. That's maybe now where you could explain what's going on here. And at the very least, you'll confuse them, but hopefully they're going to understand what's going on and be like, okay, yeah, I see what that's worth there, and I think we're going to have a lot better chance selling the property at $300,000. Because ultimately, if you can get that price down to begin with there, you won't have to worry as much about doing price reductions down the road. And when you do have to do price reductions down the road, especially if you said, oh yeah, we could definitely sell this for $300,000, and then you end up having to do a price reduction, that's where they're losing faith in you as a professional. So the more you understand this, the more you explain this, the more you look at this under a magnifying glass rather than just trying to figure out what the computer says the value is worth, the better idea it is that you're going to come up with a value. So let's use another example here. Same type of scenario, but we're not going to look at bedrooms this time. We're just going to look at one property, because that was looking at 3 properties, our subject property plus 2 comparable sales in the neighborhood. Now we're going to just look at one property. So we're really going to even make this a little bit simpler, but we're going to use a little bit more complex items here. So now, and again, you're going to use basically a different one of these number lines and a different form of adjustments for each type of property. So here again, we have a high value property maybe, and here we have a low value property. So high value here, low value here, same thing applies. Now we have our subject property, and we're going to put our subject property in here. Let's draw our subject property here. So our subject, again, the subject, very important you understand that term. You know how to speak the language of real estate. This subject property has a pool. So yeah, there's our little pool here. We'll give it a little diving board too, maybe. That's our pool. So this property has a pool. We're trying to figure out what that means in this whole adjustment type of process. Well, let's say we have another property that's sold in the neighborhood that does not have a pool. This is going to be our comparable, and we'll say here no pool. So this property has a pool, this property does not have a pool. And now if you're taking this as an exam question, it's going to tell you what that pool is worth. So let's say the pool is worth we'll say $25,000. In most cases, that's about as much money you get out of a pool. If you've ever put in a pool, or you know somebody who has put in a pool, they probably spent more than $25,000 on that. And that's where you almost have to be the bad guy as a real estate professional and tell them, hey, I know you spent $100,000 putting in this pool. It's a beautiful pool. This is, in fact, the nicest pool that I've ever seen before. But that's not going to necessarily translate to value, because it will help out the value. It definitely will. But it's not going to get an extra $100,000 in the property value. It could. Maybe if you're dealing with a very high-end property, maybe you're getting that extra value in the property. But typically, you're not going to see anything much more than $25,000. And even that is a stretch for how much value a pool adds. But again, if this is an exam, it's going to give you that information. It's only in the real world where you have to make the distinction and the understanding of what that pool actually translates to in the value of the property. So what are we comparing to? That's the question here. What are we comparing to? It's the subject. The subject is our level playing field. So now, even though I put our subject way up here, the reason why I put it up above is because this has a pool and this does not have a pool. So now what are we going to use? We're going to use CIA. Because with the comparable not having a pool, our comparable is inferior. So our comparable is inferior, so we have to add to the property value, and we're going to add the value of the pool of $25,000. So this property without a pool, that pool's worth, or with a pool, is worth $25,000. Our comparable over here without a pool, no pool, is worth $25,000 less. So what we're asking basically is how much would this property sell for if it did have the pool? Well, essentially $25,000 more. That's the adjustment that we're making. And for exam questions, this is really easy to eliminate half the answer choices, because with the real estate exam, whether you're taking it in class or online, it's 4 different prongs. It's add or subtract to the comparable, and then add or subtract to the subject. One easy way to eliminate some of this is our subject property is what we're comparing to. We're never adding or subtracting from this because we don't know what the value may be. On our comparable property, on the other hand, this is a comparable sale. So this is a property that's sold in our neighborhood for, let's say in this case we'll make it $275,000. So let's say this property sold for $275,000. If we add $25,000, meaning we're adding the value of the pool, we're putting an imaginary pool on the property. If we do that, that adds $25,000 in value for this pool. That's going to make our adjusted sale price $300,000. So our comparable without a pool sold for $275,000, but had they had a pool, it would have sold for $300,000. And now if this is that same scenario we're looking at before as the ones with the bedrooms and whatnot, adding the value of that pool, again, that's telling us that our value of the property is probably worth $300,000. So you can see how you start to get more confident about the value of the property when you understand these different metrics that we're either adding or subtracting here. Since this comparable did not have a pool, we're adding the value of the pool, which brings our adjusted value up to $300,000. Our adjusted value of $300,000 says that the property will probably sell for $300,000. Now, this is more of an art than a science. And what that comes down to in the real world is maybe it doesn't add $25,000 in value. Maybe it doesn't translate to exactly that. And again, this is where it's more of an art now than a science, because we have to be a little bit more artistic or a little bit more really scientific in this case here about figuring out the value of the pool. But ultimately, the only person that's right with this is the person who figures out what it actually does sell for. You could do all this math and be as creative as you can with this math, but if you're way off from the sale price, the ultimate goal is to figure out the sale price. This is really just tools to help you figure out the sale price of the property, but this is a very effective tool. This is one of the easiest ways to help dial in on the property value if you're using accurate numbers here. So that is the sales comparison approach for basically adjusting the value of the property to get some adjusted sale prices here. We had a couple questions that came in on the comment line here, so if whether you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and put your comments in right now. This is your last chance to get a question in for this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. My name is John Carissimo, and don't go anywhere because we'll be back right after this break.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment.
If you know if someone wants to start or enhance their career in real estate, we have a gift they're sure to love. You can now purchase gift certificates for any of our courses or study materials. These can be used for our classroom courses throughout the Tampa Bay area or our online courses available from anywhere in the world. We can even set these up for our exam prep tools or our bookstore. Our advisors are standing by to help you choose the perfect gift for your loved ones this holiday season. These gift certificates never expired and can be used anytime, so give us a call today at 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. And from our family to yours, happy holidays from the Tampa School of Real Estate. After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career. Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, and welcome back to the final segment of this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Carissimo, and this show is brought to you by Tampa School of Real Estate. This is a little bit longer show than normal, but I'm okay doing that because we're doing this for our students. Anything that we can to help out our students, we're the school to provide that. You're not going to find a level of service with our school with any other school. We have the best courses available. We have the best instructors. So check us out on the website or give us a call. Phone number is 813-928-0106. So I have time for one more question here, and this one came in from, it was Mito Rosales that posted this on Facebook. So again, if you guys are watching this here, this is a live show, so you can post your information, your questions on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever it is that you're watching this, and send in your questions, and we'll answer them here, or I'll try to answer them at least live here on the show. And if you're watching this in the recording, just send an email to info@tampa-school.com. That's info@tampa, little hyphen sign, school.com. Send in your questions there, and we'll make it onto next week's show. Again, this is every Wednesday at noon. So our last question that we have, it's a topic basically we're going to be talking about of concurrent ownership. So concurrent ownership. Concurrent ownership means that we have two or more people that own a piece of property. And there's really 3 times that we're going to see this. Our first one is the tenancy in common. Our next one is our joint tenancy. And our last one is our tenancy by the entireties. So, with these 3 different types of concurrent ownership, this one's probably the easiest one to identify. Tenancy by the entireties is ownership between spouses, so it's limited to 2 owners, whereas a joint tenancy could be 2+. And a tenancy in common could be also 2 plus owners. Key thing is we have at least 2 owners here. Tenancy by the entireties, we only have 2 owners. These other 2, we have 2 or more types of owners. Now the biggest thing that you want to know, because this is pretty self-explanatory here that we're dealing with multiple owners, the key thing, and this is where most of the questions lie, and this really helps you understand the full details of these concurrent ownerships the more you look into this here, and that has to do with right of survivorship. Now out of these, one of them does not have right of survivorship. So let's talk about what right of survivorship is. Right of survivorship, again, we have a little pie. Let's say we have 3 owners here. I think your question that came in here was 3 owners that you were describing in this here. So we have 3 different owners. And let's say this owner dies. This goes to their heirs. So when one of the owners dies and the property transfers to their heirs, meaning the other owners don't have anything to do with that share, that's going to be no right of survivorship. So this is no right of survivorship. Somebody dies, the property goes to their heirs. Now let's talk about what right of survivorship is. And this is going to be where we have 3 owners. And now this owner dies, but now rather than it going to their heirs, with right of survivorship, it actually goes to the 2 remaining owners. So these 2 owners now are going to take over their share. So it goes from being 1/3 or 33% each to 50-50 between the remaining 2 owners. That's the big difference we have between right of survivorship and no right of survivorship, which is very important to know about just for understanding this concept, but this is also a very hot topic that you'll see in exam questions. So right of survivorship, other owners take over the share of property. No right of survivorship, it goes to the owner's heirs. It goes to whoever, whether it's through a will or however it is, through descent, or maybe the state takes over the property because no one comes forward to claim the property. Whatever that may be, it goes to somebody else. It doesn't go to the remaining owners. That's no right of survivorship. Now, probably should have drew these out differently here because these 2 are joint tenancy and are tenancy by the entireties. Both of these have right of survivorship. This one has no right of survivorship. So right of survivorship over here, no right of survivorship here. So this one goes to their heirs. This one goes to the other owners. So that's our big difference here. If at any time the property goes to heirs rather than the other owners, you're dealing with a tenancy in common if we have multiple owners. So if it's going to heirs rather than the other owners of the property, that's a tenancy in common. That's the only one it could be out of these 3. But now if it goes to the other owner, that's maybe where we have a joint tenancy or we have a tenancy by the entireties. Now tenancy by the entireties, this is between a husband and wife. So between a husband and wife, that makes a lot of sense that if the husband dies, the wife takes over the property and vice versa. So that's a tenancy by the entireties that does have right of survivorship. Now a joint tenancy, this one very similar to the tenancy by the entireties, but it doesn't necessarily have to be between spouses. Anybody could enter into a joint tenancy as long as they do it accurately and correctly. They put the correct wording in the deed because there's a bunch of stuff that's required to create a valid joint tenancy. And if you're doing that, that's going to be right of survivorship. So with a joint tenancy, the other owner, it's going to go to the other owners as opposed to a tenancy in common. There's no right of survivorship, and that's going to their heirs. So that's the concurrent ownership. This is the most important thing to know about concurrent ownership is who gets the property when somebody dies. A lot of exam questions on that and just good real estate general knowledge. A little bit less likely this will come up in the real world, but it is a very highly questioned question for both class and state exams. It's a very hot topic. It's coming out of a big chapter in the percentages in the pre-licensing course for kind of need-to-know information. You'll see this pop up again in post-licensing and continuing education, all kinds of stuff. It's something that's very highly tested on because it's one of the laws of Florida that they want people to know. So next week, on next episode, next Wednesday at noon, we'll talk more about these concurrent types of ownership and what some of these different attributes of them now. If that question about who gets the property when somebody dies and what type of ownership it is, this is what you need to know right here. But there is more to this. Less likely that you'll see information on this that you'll need to know, but definitely still good information that you'll want to have up here. So that's it for this week's show. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you guys are enjoying this, even if you're watching this later on the replay, post your comments in the feed, because we still go back and review this, and if there's something that wasn't entirely clear, we'll revisit that in next week's episode. So again, this is every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. My name is John Carissimo, and you've watched Ask the Instructor. Thanks for tuning in today.
When you look back on your real estate career, you'll remember the moment you decided to begin this journey. The moment when you finally decided it was time for change. The moment when you decided it was time to take charge. The moment that changed the direction of your life forever. Now is that moment.
If you know if someone wants to start or enhance their career in real estate, we have a gift they're sure to love. You can now purchase gift certificates for any of our courses or study materials. These can be used for our classroom courses throughout the Tampa Bay area or our online courses available from anywhere in the world. We can even set these up for our exam prep tools or our bookstore. Our advisors are standing by to help you choose the perfect gift for your loved ones this holiday season. These gift certificates never expired and can be used anytime. So give us a call today at 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. And from our family to yours, happy holidays from the Tampa School of Real Estate. After the show, be sure to visit tampaschoolofrealestate.com. Again, that's tampaschoolofrealestate.com, where you'll find all the information you need to start your career in real estate. Also, be sure to check out our Success Center, where you'll find helpful tips for building a successful real estate career. Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching.